Ray, it's obvious that you've tried many jury trials over the course of your career. Do you think our jury system still works?
Yes.
Would you think that if you were a corporate lawyer representing Ford?
I would now. What's happened with the jury system is what they've Fox News is hurt some, but in small towns, John, as you know, we profile juries pretty good here. When I tried that murder case in Chicago, I couldn't profile, but what I learned since I was representing an African American man, that I wanted jurors from the South Side. That's what Todd Musburger told me. And the reason for it was that's where the African American community was. So I profile juries pretty good, and I've been told that my voir dire sometimes win cases for me. That's what the court reporter tells me a lot of times. You wonder on voir dire the way you handled that. So does it still work? Absolutely, it still works because I'm still doing it and I'm still getting some results. Now, the problem is that the Republicans, in my opinion, have taken away the rights of the worker and the work comp reforms and the tort reforms, saying you can't get so much but so much money no matter how bad your injuries are. I mean, I hope when the Supreme Court finally gets that case, they rule it unconstitutional, but who knows. But yes, I think it still works.
How did you learn to voir dire a jury?
Practice, practice, practice. Voir dire is storytelling. You've got to, and the best example I can give you is in storytelling. I like to use my granddaddy, my grandmother, stuff like that. If I've got a DUI case, I'll say, if my grandmother knew I was having this case, I was representing somebody who was accused of drinking anything, she'd probably disown me. Maybe some of you feel the same way. Mrs. So-and-so, do you feel like my grandmother? And I do that. And then if I got a case like in bias, how do you get somebody to admit bias? We all have a built-in bias. So my stock on that is that, you know, my grandfather was quite a character and taught me a lot. And one of the things he taught me, he took me back to West Virginia one time, and he was a judge in a county fair. And in the county fair, he was the judge, which is the best pie, cherry or apple. And he told the contestants, I've got a problem. I love cherry pie. Now, that doesn't mean that he was being, but would it be fair for him to judge if he didn't like apple pie at all? So I'm planting, and it goes a little deeper than that, but the point I'm making is it's showing a bias without making you look like you're a racist or whatever you're trying to show a bias. We all have that. And so I've learned to do that, and you've got to identify with the jury by making them feel as comfortable as you are uncomfortable to start with. You know, I've been trying lawsuits for 40 years, ladies and gentlemen. I can't pick a jury. How can I know what's in your mind? But I know one thing. You've heard the Attorney General say a minute ago that all he wants is a fair and impartial jury. I don't think he's telling the truth. You know why? I don't want a fair and impartial jury. I want you to favor me. But one thing I've learned in 40 years is that you will favor me when you hear what comes from that witness stand over there. And that's sort of the way I start a jury, to make them feel comfortable, to make them talk. Most young lawyers, and I teach at the trial college every year with Rich McGee. I always say I don't have the time, but I feel obligated because he spends so much time doing that, going and giving his time for that. But it never fails that I learn from these young lawyers who are there with their ideas and what they're thinking. So that over the years has helped me more than anything in working juries, is to be able to make them. I'm no different than you. I might be a lawyer, but gee whiz.
But you are 72 years old.
74.
74 years old, excuse me.
I wish I'd have
You're
said
seeing younger jurors, I suppose, and do you think like they do? Are you able to relate to them like?
Here's the thing. I've had a child born in every decade since the 60s. I've listened to music of my mother and dad sitting in my library, and then my oldest baby girl, and then my oldest baby boy, all 10 years apart. And suddenly I know what these young people are doing. And plus, you can be immature all your life. That's me. I don't want to grow up. Yeah, you do see younger jurors, but I know what. Are you reading Rolling Stone magazine, or are you reading Fox News and that sort of thing? I ask those questions about them, of what they read. I don't ask them what their Republican Party is. I mean, I know who the Republicans are in my town, for example, and if I'm in Pulaski, I'll go to Joe Henry and ask him. If I'm over here, I'll come to you and tell me who the players are and so forth, to be able to ask questions to them. Sometimes, I remember when I tried that, we had to pick a jury one time in Dickinson County because we couldn't get one in the other county. And one of the things I asked, if, Madam, do you have any children at home? This was a murder case, schoolyard killing. Do you have any children at home? Yes. How old? 16. If somebody came to you tomorrow and said your son had just shot somebody at the school, what would be your reaction? She said it would be a lie. Really? What if somebody told you he had lost his head and just gone berserk? Well, something must have been wrong with him. Like what? And so I made her talk about maybe he had a girlfriend, you know, his puppy love. And what I was trying to do was to get her to see that things happen to people in a moment in time. And I was using her as my example. And my young lawyer sitting beside me in the case said, you got to get rid of her. I said, no, she'll be a champion. Keep her. Because our theme fits what she just said. So that's what I've learned about juries and attempting to persuade, sway, see my side. For the most part, DAs are pretty boring in their, you know, just anybody here not be fair? They don't talk. The other thing young lawyers don't do, they don't listen. They're thinking about the next question instead of really absorbing what the juror is saying. It could be a key. And you'd be surprised at I had a woman who never took a drink in her life, was just, would not even think about somebody drinking. It must be awful. And my client was charged with a DUI fifth. Now, juries don't know that it's a fifth until after the trial, because it's bifurcated, that part. But she was so outraged. And I said, where did you grow up? She told me. And I said, what did your father do? He was a milker. So was my client. I knew she was from the profile. I said, he was a milker. Gee whiz, what time do you have to get up in the morning? 2:30? Was he just worn out all the time? He was, Miss Fraley, he was worn out all the time. So did he drink? No, he did not drink. But if he went out at night, would it be dangerous for him? Yes, he was just worn out. Couldn't do it. Had to milk twice a day. And I said, Mr. Smith over here is a dairy farmer. Worn out. And she became my champion in that case. And every time the jury would come out for a question for the judge, she'd look at me and go, I'm trying. I'm trying. I just said, don't let the other side see that.
Would that have been jury misconduct?
It could have been. It could have been. Of course, if you're not on the edge, you're taking up too much space.
If she were saying that to the DA, would you have been for getting rid of her?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I'd have been jumped all over that one.
You think a judge would have listened to you?
Yes, he would have.
So
I'd have
that
made a
would lead
record.
me to believe that was jury
That's
misconduct.
the other thing. When you try a lawsuit in a jury, you're trying it at 3 levels. You're trying it to the jury, to the judge, and to the appellate court. You got to make that record absolutely clear. One of the cute cases I had a fellow, his name was Uncle Jimmy. And Uncle Jimmy had been seduced by a 17-year-old that he didn't want to leave the house. She wanted to go out with a bunch of thugs, and he refused. And so she put the old seduce on him. And anyway, we tried that case, and I had to put him on Uncle Jimmy on the stand. And the jury acquitted him when he said, Jimmy, what happened? We know she was. And he said, I got aroused. Aroused. Never heard that word, but I loved it. And the jury let him go. I got aroused. But
you feel good about that victory, or did you feel?
I felt
guilty?
great about that one, because I knew, this little gal had taken advantage of Uncle Jimmy, who was about a nitwit.
Now, are you able to use all this current age technology in your preparation and your voir dire and?
No. One of the blessings I have, though, for the last 12 years, 13 years, I've had an investigator full-time. I'm one of the few that have a full-time investigator who is so smart. He's a big old country boy, about 6'5", played football at Tennessee. All he ever wanted to be was a police officer and got hurt playing football. He could have gone to Vanderbilt. Just brilliant. Made a 36 on the ACT, perfect. And he knows this stuff backwards and forwards. And he sits beside me and we put up on the big board and I give him a keyword and it pops up. Oh, it is one fine technique and it's made me a better lawyer because of him. And I'm blessed because I've got John Hill, my partner, who Stanley Rogers called me 5 years ago and said, I've got a young man over here. He's from Fayetteville. Will you give him a shot? And I did, and my Lord, I never realized how much I needed somebody like him who's so smart, such an intellect. And I got great secretaries, been with me over 20 years and one over 6 or 7, and he just makes things happen when you got that kind of staff.
Do you see yourself changing in the next 4, 5, 6 years in the way you approach your practice?
No.
Do you plan to work till you die?
I go to Higgins Funeral Home, which is right next door to me, and I ask if they got a closeout every day just so I can get something cheap. But because nobody wants to go to heaven in Fayetteville, they want to go to Higgins, so I'm the first one over there. But do I want to die in the saddle? Nah, not necessarily, but I don't know what to do. It feels like I've been given a gift because I had so many wasted time in my life when I finally, I didn't get out of law school until I was 30. And you probably knew from the very beginning, you graduated tops in your class, and tops at the college, and you probably had in your mind what you wanted to do. I think you're one of the fortunate ones when you can do that. I didn't have a clue. I was bouncing from pillar to post, and I feel like I'm so lucky.
Well, you do a lot of things other than practice law, don't you?
I think one of the things I teach at the trial college and when I lecture high school students is you've got to have a periphery, an outlet. And they can be anything. And I tell young people, who especially lawyers, I said, you ought to get into little theater. It gives you a chance to get a different brain exercise. And I've enjoyed that. I've done 20-some plays. I've played The Music Man, Harold Hill. I've played Guys and Dolls, Nathan Detroit. And my favorite was Shadowlands. I played C.S. Lewis in that. And what it does, it just gives you a different intellectual pursuit away from the law.
You still mentor and coach young kids, or at least you did mine, and I hope you're doing it for my grandkids. Are you still? I
still pitch batting practice and things like that. I'm not active in the league anymore. But again, having something to do outside. Look, I give you sort of an example. One time I tried this rape case, and the jury hung. One fella held for me, and they didn't retry the poor old man. And the Ku Klux Klan put a sign on my window that said, "The Ku Klux Klan is watching you." And the newspaper interviewed me, and I said, "Oh, I don't mind them watching. I'm a voyeur myself." The next day, somebody shot the glass out of my window. And the point I'm making is, we can't do everything we want, so we have to. You read, and you can maybe be in France by reading. I've done 42 triathlons, 12 marathons, 1 ultra. I did 2. I tell everybody, my first and last. But it gives you, and I played tennis tournaments in the past. I pitched my oldest baby boy, Will. When he graduated from college, he was in a college league up in Nashville, and one Sunday I pitched to him. And then the next week I was in Shelbyville, Tennessee pitching and gave up 3 home runs, and they looked like, BBs going out of there. And I called him over to me and I said, "Hey, you gonna give me some signals?" He said, "Pop, I can catch you barehanded." I guess I was losing my stuff. I said, "Well, good location." He said, "Yeah, they look like you could put a stewardess on those things that just left the park." But it was an outlet. I was doing something different. I played in the Senior Olympics one year in basketball. We got killed, but I was there. And
you still take in sports events, don't you?
I like to go to Carolina basketball and Carolina football, and I'm a Texas Ranger diehard. They were the old Washington Senators when I was in North Virginia, so I followed them all along.
How many North Carolina football games will you see this year?
3.
What about basketball games?
Well, Gus, my youngest baby boy, keeps season tickets up there at the football, and he has all the contacts as a basketball coach. So I might see 5, but I watch him on TV. You know, we were talking earlier on one of the breaks about do you watch a lot of TV? If I'm watching TV, I'm multitasking. I'm either reading a book or I'm on a trainer. I don't like the thoughts of just sitting there. It makes my wife mad because she says, let's watch a movie, something like that. I said, we can if it's a 1940s movie.
Do you watch much TV other than sports?
No.
In the last 12 months, how many books have you read?
I try to read 80 a year, but I've only done it once. Last year I read 66.
To date this year?
To this year I'm on 38. I'm finishing Jerry Sumner's Rush to Judgment, which I've enjoyed the heck. And you gave me one the other day called West End by a fellow who said it's a Crockett. What's his last name? White. But it's really good. It's got John J. Hooker written all over it, as you suggested. And it's been a fun read. It's a quick read. But it does have a little bit that history of Nashville and West End and so forth. And the books I have read, every New Year's Day, I get up and I get a little brandy and pears. I like pears with it. And I pull my list of books I've read. I keep a diary. And I'll try, and it's amazing how many books I can't even remember the plot or anything about it. So I go to my library shelf and I pull it off. Oh yeah, I remember now. But the great books, I can even quote pages and like Robert Penn Warren's All the King's Men, Education Little Tree, a wonderful book. And if you haven't ever read that, it's written by one of the biggest racists that ever came out of. He was a speechwriter for Wallace. But those books are just memorable to me, that are important. I've read the classics. I've tried to read those. I try to keep 4 books going at one time. I always try to read something that's quick. I like James Lee Burke, for example, out of Louisiana. He's poetic. His character's Dave Robichaux. Wonderful. I like Lee Childs, who writes his character as Jack Reacher, a big tough guy. You know, I like him. He's a loner and so forth. I like Ace Atkins, whose character is a blues fellow who loves blues. But have you ever tried to read Prometheus Bound, for example? Aeschylus's. I mean, this is tough read. One summer I decided I was going to read Proust. Whew, that was an ordeal, but I made it through. I'm not sure what I made out of it, but the greatest prose writer of all time, Winston Churchill, said it best. He said the greatest prose writer was Edward Gibbon, who wrote The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. And I tried that years and years ago, and he's right. He wrote with great adjectives rather than great verbs. Yeah, that's...
What was your major in college?
Well, I started history, but I went to English.
Do you think that impacts your law?
Literature, English literature.
Think that impacts your law practice at all?
Absolutely. You know, somebody said, do you have any original thoughts? And I said, well, yeah, but it's just disguised plagiarism.
Speaking of which, you hear a little political back and forth on plagiarism. It would seem to me that it'd be hard to have any kind of dissertation today without plagiarizing something that's already been said.
That's what I said. It's hard.
Dress in on that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I like to write. One of the things I made a decision several years ago that maybe something I could do besides practice law would be write. If something happened to me, that I could write. And so I've been dabbling in writing. I've written a play and 6 or 7 short stories and some poems and essays and things like that. Only because it gives me pleasure, but it also made me realize how deficient I was in English. So I spend 30 minutes every Saturday morning, if I'm home, and I'm usually home, outside with my cats and dogs, just so they have watching a centipede walk along or something, and read grammar.
Now, what does that mean? Read grammar.
Well, I got a bunch of grammar books. I have about 20 grammar books. My favorite's written by a guy named Ed Goodwin out of Greensboro, North Carolina. We kind of talked about this at lunchtime, but the inability for folks to recognize the past tense versus the past participle. I could have went instead of I could have gone. Past tense of lay and lie. It's funny how they... And so, but making me do that's maybe a better writer. Plus, I've learned to use better sentence syntax. I remember the first short story I wrote it when I was in Chapel Hill visiting at the Carolina Inn one morning. I got up and wrote a thing called Weenie Beanie. And I rewrote it 20 years later when I realized how bad it was. And it got published over in South Carolina somewhere. And it was terrible. And so when my children went to Carolina, I went back to school. And I never forget it. I took 2 courses at Chapel Hill. And you had to write 15 essays a semester. And you had to take a final exam at Chapel Hill. So I'm up there taking that. I went up to take the test. Gus dropped me off. And he said, get 3 hours. I said, I'll have this thing done in an hour and a half. Well, for 3 hours, I'm still struggling finishing these essays and so forth and writing. Got a B+, 2 B pluses. I wanted 2 A's and I got 2 B pluses. But it was a great effort in writing, having a professor critique me at Chapel Hill. Where, by the way, with respect to Chapel Hill, the reason I love that so much is, first of all, Diane was a Merit Scholar there, and so when she was in Chapel Hill, I went from University of North Carolina in Wilmington to Chapel Hill and spent a year and a half up there and took my last courses at Chapel Hill. I wanted to go, if I could have played baseball, I stayed another year and a half.
But you'd run out of eligibility?
I ran out of eligibility, and but Carolina's just real close to me. My children went there, and it just...
That's a little difficult for a Virginia guy to say that, isn't it?
Well, I remember my mother and dad retired in North Carolina, and
all right, you do all this reading, you do all this trial college, you do all this sports stuff. What time do you go to bed at night?
10.
What time do you get up in the morning?
4:30.
Okay, so 6.5 hours. Is that adequate for you?
Yeah, I would sometimes I'd like to say, but I work out in the morning, and what I do, I always like to multitask. I go down and I watch Morning Joe while I'm working out.
What time of day? 4:30?
5 o'clock. I get up, for the last 30 years, I do 55 sit-ups every morning and 55 push-ups, then I go downstairs every other day in the weight room in my house. And
why 55?
I don't know. It's just, I like to, when I'm with Gus and some of his buddies, I'll say, I can do 100 right now. Can you do them? Hope they don't challenge me.
Do you watch the 10 o'clock news at night?
No.
Do you watch any news?
Only the NBC.
Now, you mentioned 2 or 3 times this trial college. What is that? Where is that?
Bill Massey, who is a fine trial lawyer out of Memphis, Tennessee, started that many, many years ago, and I've been in every one of them. And what they do, it's usually around maybe close to 100 students, young students, old ones come too, to come and learn trial tactics from Bill Massey, Rich McGee, me, several others. They've come over the years, and I do a little thing in Tunica every year. I hate Tunica, by the way. It's smoke enough to drive you nuts. But Rob McKinney out of Nashville does a DUI seminar. And then I went to Knoxville one time and lectured for Penny White. It was a great thrill for me because I like being around her there. So.
Everybody knows Fraley. You seem to know everybody. How do you keep in touch after all these years with these friends?
Well, mainly because I'm trying so many cases in so many different counties, I run into them. And I love to run into somebody who says, what makes me feel good is when somebody tells one of my sons, hey, I know your dad. And because when you're growing up, I mean, when your children grow up, you never know how they really see you, You know, and so you're glad when somebody says something that you know deep down your children are proud of you. You want your children to be proud of you.
All right, tell me this. Now you're 74 years old. You're still practicing full speed and doing all these other things. Give me a typical Monday to Friday, your work schedule and your other activity schedule.
Well, first of all, on Saturdays, I usually work 4 hours. But that 4 hours includes my study on other things like the grammar. And then I'll read, but then I bring home files because Monday is General Sessions Day, and I might have as many as 22 every Monday, 18 on Thursday. Then I go to Lewisburg on Tuesdays, and I'll go to Giles County on Thursdays. And then I come over to your way on Fridays. I'll be here this Friday with 18 cases. So I have to take those home because I want to be familiar with them. I'm a pretty quick study, and we're talking about general sessions, by the way. I'm not talking about circuit court. So it's a little easier to get prepared. And I don't mean to say that it's gotten so that I can not look at a file and come have a preliminary hearing. No, I want to know what my bullet points are going to be, and so I take those home on Saturday and work them.
Well, why would a guy that just got a $5.2 million settlement, or verdict rather, over here in Bedford County, be in General Sessions Court the next Monday morning with 20 cases?
That's one of the great questions you've asked me today. Let me tell you something funny. When I got that $5.2 million verdict at 9:30 Friday night after 2 weeks of trial, two things happened. I talked to the jury person afterwards, and I just to question him about what he thought about the case. And he looked at me and he said, "Where do you get your suits?" I thought, my Lord, thank God I wore a good-looking suit every day. Where do you get your suits? Well, the next morning, I rushed home to have dinner with some friends at a little restaurant in Fayetteville out in Kelso, Tennessee, and celebrate this big victory. And I'm going to tell you a story that's worth telling. So the next morning, I'm out on my patio with my working, and I get calls from people. Barry White over in Marshall County calls me, and he says, "I just want to tell you how proud I am. I can't believe, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm out on my patio drinking some champagne." I said, "No, I got a DUI case in Mount Pleasant, Tennessee on Monday. I'm getting prepared for it." So that tells you why. It's that, I don't know why. But I'm going to tell you there's not much distance between melancholy and exhilaration. When I got that $5.2 million verdict, the other side paid us, CJ, right at $300 in compensatory. The other was punitive. The other side appealed. 4 or 5 months later, the appellate court dismissed my case summarily. Boom, took away the $5 million. Devastating. The day that happened, the day the opinion came down, I'm on my way to Nashville, Tennessee to mediate a pharmacy case that I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to settle. And my wife says, "Would you mind dropping Gus's new car off at the airport?" Because I was going to fly in to see my mother in North Carolina. He was coming in from Chapel Hill. I said, "Well, Deb, I don't know if I'm going to be finished by the airline, but I'll sure, absolutely." Well, at 9 o'clock, they offered me $25,000. At 6:15, the day that I got the $5 million taken away from me, I got $4.6 million. Well, I missed my airplane. I got to Asheville, North Carolina about 1:30 in the morning. I could have driven to China. I was so high. And then the Supreme Court granted certiorari in our case, the Tennessee Supreme Court, and CJ argued it and got it reinstated at 10% interest. Oh, mercy. Thank you, CJ.
Would it be an accurate statement to say you could be an adrenaline junkie?
Well, my wife says, "Will you slow down?" Because the older I've gotten and I'm still trying to be quick, I'm running into things all the time, and what happens? You bruise so easy. I mean, seriously, and my skin is so thin.
All right, speaking of skin being thin, you had a little health problem here 6 or 8 months ago.
I did.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Oh, I was doing these races and all things. I was getting shortness of breath. I went to Mayo and everything, and they said, "You've got angina." I said, "What? Well, can you fix it?" "Well, we can't fix it probably." So anyway, several years later, when it got worse, I was at 50, I was playing in the Senior Olympics, and I was getting shortness of breath. So finally, Debbie kept my present wife, who I've been with for 30-some years, and who is my ballast, and who is an absolute, one of those women who has great equanimity to put up with somebody like me. She's Greek, nothing seems to bother her. Well, I won't say that, but anyway, I finally go to another doctor, and he says, "Mr. Fraley, you've got an aortic valve that needs immediate attention." I said, "How about 3 months?" And no, 2 weeks. So the next thing I know, in December, I'm in the hospital, and they put an aortic valve. I got a pig valve. It's a wonderful thing if you stay away from pigsties. But it was kind of rough, to tell you the truth. I mean, you worry, am I going to recover from this thing? Am I going to feel this way forever? And but since January, had the thing in December. Since January, I'm at right now, as of yesterday, I'm within 50 miles of 3,000 miles on the bike already.
You sound real macho there, but if you'll reflect back, there were
you came to see me.
several weeks that you were pretty shaggy.
I was pitiful. It was pitiful.
What did you do during that period of time to keep from going crazy?
I wrote a great essay. I gave you a copy of it called "Recipes of Wellness." That I really liked it. You know, and then I did a lot of reading. They wouldn't let me go to the office, but I could dictate at home. But I don't know. You just, you know, it's. I know everybody's got to die. I realize that. I think, but I'm sort of like William Sorin, who was a great writer at one time back in the early 20s and so forth. He said, "I know everybody's got to die, but I wonder if there could be an exception for me." You know, probably not. But I'm going to keep posing the question.
All right, let me. Have you been a participant in the organized legal functions and like the Tennessee Bar and all?
Yeah, I'm at the Tennessee Bar. Of course, you got to be that, I guess.
You have to be because you have to pay money.
Pay money, but I'm a lifetime member of the Tennessee Trial Lawyers Association, lifetime, which means I can go to the seminars free. I'm a lifetime member of TACTL, Tennessee Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. I'm with the Trial College. I'm with, what else am I involved in? I don't belong to any civic clubs in Fayetteville or anything like that.
You've been a great sports booster over the years in Fayetteville, though.
Yeah, I do. And they're academics. I remember one year I gave, I wanted to give them, the principal called me and said they're going to do a physiology class, anatomy, and when they wanted to buy a cadaver. And he said, "We don't have any textbooks." I said, "Well, you got them now." "Well, there's something about the association said you can't do that." I don't know if they meant the body or not, but yeah, I'm big on education. I don't like the education system we have right now. We're not looking at, first of all, we got to look at aptitude. I recognize that, but everybody's aptitude is not geared for tests and things. Then you got to have passion and attitude, and those three things we're just lacking. Someday I'll tell you why these Trump and all this, what he's going to do to fix the killings and all. They got to recognize it's got to be through education, and I got a plan.
All right, now I don't want to get too deep into this, but I take it from your previous statements throughout this that you are indeed a Democrat.
Yellow dog.
A yellow dog Democrat. Do you think a trial lawyer can be anything but a Democrat?
I can't imagine any lawyer be anything but a Democrat.
How do you really feel about that?
Well,
and why do you say that?
I'm upset with the Democrats too, and some of the things that are happening. But in principle, we are human rights people. Look, we have democracy. But because of our inclination towards injustice, I just can't imagine being a judge putting people in jail, in prison.
You think people don't deserve to ever go to prison?
No, I didn't say that. I'm saying there's too many people with drug cases, for example, that are being incarcerated and housed, and they come out monsters that they weren't there before. I just think that there's got to be a better way, that we are a civilized country and have more people incarcerated than any combined in the world, of the civilized world. And it's usually because of, I can't get elected unless I put people in jail.
Do you think that's helped or hurt your practice, or has no bearing?
Well, it hadn't hurt it at all. I get a lot of static from folks who are Republicans trying to convince. Look, the insurance companies, oh my Lord, they're just raking us across the coals day in and day out. How much money does a corporation have to make? How much does a CEO have to make? Infrastructure in this country is awful.
That's easy to say for a man that's settled probably $30 million worth of cases in the last. How do you reconcile all that?
I'm broke.
I won't delve into that because I think you're just shunning the question. Now, you indicated that you participated in organized bar functions and programs and so forth. Do you see that significant for young lawyers?
Yes, I do. I mean, it's that camaraderie we need. I think the practice of law is a tough field, but I tell my young lawyers it's better than working. I remember carrying a hod when I was a boy in the summers, you know, carrying toting brick and mortar and things like that, and the other things that people can do. The real heroes are those people working $9 and $10 an hour and have 4 people at home to support. Gee whiz! When I go out to dinner sometime, if I spend $500 for a meal, you know, just have a fine glass of wine, I'm going to make sure I'm giving $500 to somebody on Monday. That's been my motto.
It seems to be that Kismet has worked out pretty well with that
Been the
philosophy.
luckiest man in the world. Every time I get a setback with a bad investment, and I've had more than my share. I should have stuck with you over the years. You know how to do it, and I've always admired your ability as a lawyer to do what you've done, and I haven't, and I should have listened to you and Bart. But every time I've had a bad break, something good happens. So I don't know. So do I want to look back? By the way, having fun, let me tell you, did one fun thing. Lee Russell's a judge over here in your way, but I was trying a divorce case the other day, and it was a serious case, and the woman was just a whiner. And she was whining and carrying on, and I said, "Objection!" And the judge says, "What's your objection, Judge Russell?" I said, "Misuse of the reflexive pronoun." Judge, you know, you got to be intellectual and understand that. And
Judge Russell is a Phi Beta Vanderbilt guy.
Yeah, very bright guy. And he says, yes, yes. And the woman said, "What did he say?" I said, "Well, that's okay, sustained, go on." And she went on to talk a little bit, and I said, "Sick?" And the woman said, "SIC." And the woman says, "He just called me sick?" He said, "No, ma'am, no, ma'am. Fraley, go on, try this case." You know, I just decided it was time to have a little fun with this thing, you know. And the greatest story of all, I'm trying this divorce case. You know how people will get passionate with a relationship? Well, my client, when the husband came home, he was in the refrigerator with his Fruit of the Looms, BVDs or whatever they were, and the cuckold husband, "What are you doing in here?" He says, "Borrowing some milk." Well, he moved to get the children in the temporary custody thing, so as I come across the street from my office to the courthouse, and I'm a lawyer that practiced law in a small town. We call that town square versus the high-rise lawyer. So I'm walking across the street, and as I walk in, I see the whole Church of Christ congregation going into the building, going to be behind the husband who's been cuckolded. All I got's my poor little old girl and her doctor boyfriend who's did the cuckolding and so forth, and this little girl's cute little girl from Cookville originally, and the husband just was more interested in his ham radio than he was his young wife, I guess. But in any event, as I walked in, I picked up a stone, and I walked into the courtroom. Lee Russell's trying this case, and the whole side has got the Church of Christ over there behind me. I said, "Oh my Lord!" The preacher's up front. He said, "Any opening statements?" I said, "Judge, before I start, I'd like to place this stone on the," because I'd represent about half of those women in there. They're fornicating over the years. And I said, "I put this stone up here." I said, "If it please the court, before I start, I'd like to stay back and ask that he who is without sin, let him come down and cast this stone upon my poor client, because all she has is this old lawyer from Fayetteville, Tennessee, and her cowardly boyfriend was peeking through the courthouse door, but he was paying my fee, so I was glad to have him there. And her parents, who are here from Cookville." The judge goes, "This is going to go downhill from there." So he takes the stand. And you know how people say things they don't mean when they're mad and upset, particularly if you've been cuckolded? He says, I said, "Sir, you accused your wife of having a lesbian affair." He said, I said, "Sir, you accused your wife of having a lesbian." I said, "Sir, you accused your wife of having an affair." And I turned and pointed and screamed out the girl's name. She did one of these things under the table. And the judge, "Can we take an early lunch break?" Well, of course. We leave. I came back after lunch, get the grammar right. Came back after lunch. Nobody from the Church of Christ was remaining in that courtroom except the preacher who's brand new and Millie Smith, who's somebody I really like, whose son grew up in my house, and I took him to University of Virginia, where he became a basketball star there. He's like a son to me. I said, "Millie, what are you doing here?" She said, "I'm here supporting so-and-so." I said, Millie, you remember that time when my mother was visiting down here and we had the big screen TV and Carolina was playing and I was in my room reading and watched the game and you came in and jumped in the bed? Remember that? Phew, she's gone. So that was just me and that jackleg preacher, and I didn't care then. So have a little fun. Practicing law. Loosen up.
That's probably good advice, and I realize that the last 8 minutes was purely fictitious for entertainment value. Now, you wanted to close out strong and with some emphasis on your current mate and your wife. I want you to tell me a little bit about her and close out about the challenge that you made to her that brought along this matrimonial bliss.
Two things are important. My second wife, Pat Fraley, who brought me back to Fayetteville, and I'll be ever grateful, and we're great friends, by the way, and she's a good lawyer. But she kept me about 2 years and told me, gave me a great son, but told me don't let that doorknob hit you going out. So I thought about leaving Fayetteville, going to Culpeper, where Gus Panicus was, but I just said, no, I'm staying right here. That's before I had Nikki, too, with me. So I stayed, I think Pat gave me a saucepan when she threw me out. I had a saucepan. And so she took me, rode with me one time to Ethan Allen to buy some furniture for my one-room house that had a floor that slanted with my saucepan. And that's where I met my next wife, who had just graduated from the University of Alabama. And she was flitting around, a little Greek gal, and kind of cute. And I thought, And so
And what was her name?
Debbie Registration, like registration. I call her Dallas. You know, Debbie does Dallas. She says no, she's doing Destin now, so I get a kick out of that. But anyway, we dated about 8 years, and finally she said, my father, who was a Vanderbilt graduate and full-blooded Greek, says, no, he wants to know what your intentions are. I said, more honorable. She said, no. We've been going together 7 or 8 years. And I said, okay, if you run a marathon, we'll get married. So the next thing I know, she's got it impossible to get in. I'm in the London Marathon. And she starts running. And Will, my oldest, we were in a bicycle one day, one of her 13-mile runs in a race, and he looks at me and said, Dad, I think you're in trouble. I said, can you believe this? So they did a TV show about her, and they had a picture of me running, and they said, would you run 26 miles with this man? You should have seen the calls that came in. I wouldn't go anywhere with that SOB. You tell him to stick it in his ear. You know, but one said, yeah, he can put his shoes under my bed anytime. I said, who said that? It was an 82-year-old woman. Anyway, I'm in London. She runs the marathon. In London. She wanted to get married in London at the big cathedral. I said, fortunately, I had to be there 2 weeks to do that. I came home. I knew I was married when she moved her shoes in. God, it must have been 40 pair of those things, and then I knew it was over. My first mother-in-law moved in with us to visit, my Nikki. And one time, I remember after about 5 weeks, Debbie said, you think she's going to go home? I said, well, she's having a good time with Nick. She's a good cook. And so my first mother-in-law was there. My second mother-in-law one time told me, she said, I wish I'd get you back.
Now, how long have you and Debbie been married?
We've been together for almost 40 years.
And how many children do you have?
4.
How many children do you and Debbie have?
2.
And they are?
Gus and Carolina.
Okay.
Hannah.
And Gus is college coach, and Carolina Hannah is on her way to New York to practice law after she finishes.
Yep.
Okay. My final question, Mr. Fraley. Tell me what this means to you in your overall practice and your overall life. No envy.
I wrote a poem called No Envy once, and what makes great friends. And John, you and I have talked about this many times. When I got those phone calls the day after the $5.2 million verdict, people like you, Barry White, and lots, they were proud. They were glad that I did it. They shared in my success. There's a word in German, I think it's pronounced Schadenfreude, which simply means someone who takes great pride in someone else's failures. And there are too many people like that who want you to fail because they think that's going to make them. It's like I told one lawyer, I said, I could fail tomorrow and you're not going to get in my business. You're such a dumbass. You can't do it. So envy means no envy. You don't envy someone, you celebrate with him. And that's what it means, in my opinion, to be great friends. And we had Andy Rambo, who we lost tragically. And we used to have those conversations, about friendships and things like that. So, yeah, no envy. And then you and I have talked about this many times, how blessed you here you are, a Moore County youngster coming out of there, top dog in Moore County, but that's not enough. You got to pay the price, and you do other things, and you're back, and you're so blessed you got those two fine-looking boys practicing law with you. How lucky is that? Got a beautiful daughter, grandchildren that you take pride in, and that every day you're doing something with them, cutting into my time with you, by the way, but I can understand that. And me, of all things, little old brick contractor's son out of Northern Virginia.
Would you do anything different?
Yeah, I'd be like Mae West. I'd make the same mistakes, but quicker. Byron had it best when he said, from the wreck of the past which has perished, this much I may least recall. It has taught me that what we most cherished deserves to be dearest of all. It's true, I don't know if you've ever read Pippa's Passing. I love that poem, and the one that Dickinson wrote. I think about my mother when I think about it. About the I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head. I've lost the train of thought, but it's so beautiful. Hope is a thing with feathers that perches in the soul. It's a beautiful, beautiful poem. That. And I'm a Pollyanna, I admit it. But again, melancholy and exhilaration are so close. Sometimes it's tough to differentiate.
Thank you so much.
It's a bowl of cherries.
Raymond W. Fraley, Jr.